The desert sun hanging over Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the final week of April 2025, did not hint at the storm that was about to break. For months, the city's large, sun-drenched avenues and quiet suburban pockets had served as the operational nerve center for a shadow empire. A network so vast and lethal that its dismantling would later be described by United States Attorney General Pam Bondi as one of the most significant law enforcement victories in American history. To the casual observer, the city was merely a hub of southwestern culture and commerce. But to the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, and a coalition of federal agencies, it was the ground zero for a weapon of mass destruction that was flooding American streets: fentanyl. The operation, part of a massive coordinated effort known as Operation Take Back America, culminated in a series of raids that shattered the silence of the New Mexico morning. Heavily armed tactical units, their movements honed by months of surveillance and intelligence gathering, converged on multiple addresses simultaneously. This was not a routine drug bust. It was a surgical strike against a Tier 1 transnational criminal organization that had turned the high desert landscape into a distribution factory for synthetic death. Inside the stash houses and nondescript apartments of Albuquerque, agents discovered the staggering reality of the trade. They didn't just find drugs. They found an industrial-scale arsenal of poison. In one location alone, the DEA Albuquerque District Office seized over 2.7 million fentanyl pills, a record-breaking haul that represents the single largest seizure of the drug in the agency's long and storied history. To put that number into perspective, experts estimate that this single seizure removed nearly 1.5 million potentially lethal doses from circulation, effectively saving countless lives before the product could ever reach a user's hand. But the scale of the Operation Take Back America raids extended far beyond the borders of New Mexico. As Albuquerque was being secured, similar scenes of tactical precision were playing out across 5 other western states: Oregon, Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. In Salem, Oregon, authorities moved in on high-value targets, seizing over $2.8 million in cash and luxury vehicles, including a Mercedes-AMG and a Ford F-150 Shelby. In Phoenix, Arizona, the haul included another 72 pounds of methamphetamine and 13 kilograms of fentanyl pills. Every strike was a calculated blow against a machine that had been generating millions of dollars in illicit profit every month. At the center of this web stood a man named Heriberto Salazar Amaya. At 36 years old, Amaya was not a flamboyant kingpin of the old school. He was a logistical mastermind who understood the power of anonymity and the utility of fear. A Mexican national who had previously been deported from the United States, Amaya had managed to slip back across the border to build an empire on the very soil that had once rejected him. He operated with a cold, corporate efficiency, overseeing a hierarchy that included his most trusted lieutenants, Cesar Acuña Moreno and Bruce Cedillo, who managed the day-to-day grit of the distribution lines. The urgency of the crackdown was fueled by a fundamental shift in how the United States government viewed the fentanyl crisis. On the 15th of December 2024, President Donald Trump had signed an executive order officially reclassifying illegal fentanyl and its precursor chemicals as weapons of mass destruction. This was a historic move, a declaration that the synthetic opioid was no longer just a public health emergency, but a national security threat akin to chemical warfare. As Attorney General Pam Bondi noted during the Albuquerque press conference, There is no bomb that causes what fentanyl is doing to our country. The classification of fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction gave federal agencies unprecedented authority to utilize military and intelligence assets to track and dismantle the networks responsible for its spread. It allowed for the deployment of resources typically reserved for anti-proliferation and counterterrorism, signaling to the cartels that the rules of engagement had changed. The Albuquerque raids were the first major demonstration of this new doctrine in action, a multi-state offensive designed to take back America from the grip of organized crime and foreign-backed networks that Bondi alleged were flooding our cities with death. As the 16 arrested individuals were processed through the federal system, the sheer diversity of the seizures told the story of a diversified criminal enterprise. In total, the operation netted over 11.5 kilograms of fentanyl powder, 396 kilograms of fentanyl pills, and significant quantities of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. But perhaps most telling were the 41 firearms recovered, including ghost guns, and weapons equipped with illegal switches that turned semi-automatic handguns into military-grade machine guns. This was a gang prepared for war. The ammunition found, the armored vehicles, and the sophisticated concealment methods such as drugs hidden within hollowed-out industrial equipment and kitchen worktops demonstrated a level of professionalism that rivaled legitimate manufacturing. They were a network that had learned from the mistakes of the past, shunning encrypted phones that could be compromised in favor of face-to-face meetings and old-school tradecraft. Yet, despite their caution, the tartan pimpernels of the fentanyl trade could not outrun the combined might of the DEA, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and the local officers who had spent months piecing together the puzzle. The investigation, spanning Albuquerque to the English Channel-like distances of the American West, proved that even the most elusive gangsters eventually leave a trail. For Heriberto Salazar Amaya and his crew, that trail ended in the cold fluorescent light of a federal holding cell. The dismantling of this network was more than just a victory for law enforcement. It was a message to the communities devastated by the opioid epidemic. From the suburban streets of Salem to the vibrant neighborhoods of Albuquerque, families had been shattered by the products sold by Amaya's organization. The 2.7 million pills seized represented 2.7 million opportunities for tragedy that would never come to pass. The task was no longer just to find the drugs, but to ensure that those who profited from them would never see the sun as free men again. The battle for Albuquerque was over, but the war for the soul of the nation's security had only just begun. The mastermind was behind bars. His lieutenants were in chains, and the invisible tsunami of fentanyl had, for a moment, been pushed back from the shore. To understand the sheer magnitude of the Amaya network, one must look past the headlines of the Albuquerque raids and into the cold, industrial logic of their supply chain, a system that functioned with the precision of a Fortune 500 company, but dealt exclusively in human misery. This was the architecture of poison, a logistical masterpiece designed by Heriberto Salazar Amaya to ensure that the flow of fentanyl remained constant, even as the heat from federal authorities intensified. The foundation of this architecture was built on a dark alliance with the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful and ruthless transnational criminal organizations in the world. While legal proceedings often navigate the nuances of direct evidence, Attorney General Pam Bondi and federal investigators were clear. Amaya was the bridge between the Mexican cartels and the streets of the American West. This partnership allowed the network to source precursor chemicals and finished products at a scale that made them a dominant force in the region. Amaya's logistical brilliance lay in his hub-and-spoke model of distribution. Albuquerque served as the primary hub, the central nervous system where bulk shipments were received and processed. From this high-desert stronghold, spokes stretched across the western United States, reaching into secondary markets like Salem, Oregon, Phoenix, Arizona, and Layton, Utah. By decentralizing his operations, Amaya ensured that a single police raid in one city would not bring down the entire empire. Each of these cities served a specific strategic purpose within the network. Albuquerque, the processing and storage heart, where agents eventually seized nearly 400 kilograms of fentanyl pills and 11.5 kilograms of powder. Phoenix, a critical transit point due to its proximity to the border, utilized for moving high volumes of methamphetamine alongside fentanyl. Salem, and Layton, UT, high-demand markets where the organization could command premium prices, laundering the resulting millions of dollars through luxury assets. The day-to-day operations were managed by a hierarchy of trusted tenants, individuals who took the physical risks, while Amaya maintained a safe distance from the product. Bruce Cedillo, one of Amaya's key lieutenants, was more than just a manager. He was an enforcer of the network's security. When authorities raided Cedillo's locations, they found not just drugs, but the tools of a professional soldier, firearms, equipped with illegal modifications intended to outgun local law enforcement. Loyalty within the Amaya cell was not merely bought, it was enforced through a combination of family ties and the credible threat of violence. Like the Middleton gangs of the UK, Amaya relied heavily on his inner circle to maintain the cleanliness of the leadership. The use of ghost guns, firearms without serial numbers, and high-tech surveillance equipment showed a network that was acutely aware of the digital and forensic footprints they were leaving behind. The organization also perfected the art of cuckooing and using stash houses that blended perfectly into residential neighborhoods. In Santa Fe, Philip Lovato operated a specialized stash house that held over 110,000 pills, functioning as a satellite office for the larger Albuquerque hub. In these locations, the dark art of cutting and pressing drugs took place. Bulk fentanyl powder was mixed with adulterants to increase profit margins before being pressed into pills that mimicked legitimate prescription medication. This process was industrial. The organization utilized heavy-duty pressing equipment and specialized dyes to churn out millions of pills, each one a potential death sentence. By the time the DEA moved in, the Amaya network had generated a turnover that rivaled legitimate mid-sized corporations, with millions of dollars in cash being moved through a complex web of bank accounts and front businesses. The architecture of poison was designed to be invincible, but it had one fatal flaw: the very scale of its success. As the volume of drugs and guns increased, so did the noise the organization made. The trail of money, the frequency of high-value vehicle purchases, and the forensic traces left on latex gloves and packaging materials began to form a map that led directly to Amaya's door. While Amaya believed he had built a ghost network, the new classification of fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction meant that the shadows were no longer deep enough to hide him. The federal government was now looking at his business through the lens of national security, and every shipment of worktop material or industrial sack was being tracked with a level of scrutiny he never anticipated. As the organization reached its peak in early 2025, the internal mechanisms of the network began to groan under the weight of their own greed. The stage was set for Phase 3, the moment when the architecture would be dismantled piece by piece by the very laws Amaya thought he could circumvent. The dismantling of the Heriberto Salazar Amaya empire was not the result of a single lucky break, but the climax of a grueling multi-agency siege known as Operation Take Back America. For months, the DEA El Paso Division, in collaboration with the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit and a phalanx of local law enforcement, operated in the shadows. They were engaged in a high-stakes game of digital and physical chess, mapping a network that prided itself on being invisible. While Amaya believed his old-school face-to-face communication methods shielded him from the reach of the law, the federal government was using the full weight of its newly expanded authority to pierce his veil of deniability. The investigation relied on a sophisticated prison street nexus analysis and intelligence-led policing. Detectives meticulously tracked the financial flows, following a paper trail of drug money that the organization attempted to clean through luxury assets and complex bank transfers. Every high-end vehicle purchase, the Ford Raptors, the Mercedes AMGs, and the GMC Denali, acted as a breadcrumb, leading investigators closer to the heart of the conspiracy. By late April 2025, the trap was set. The goal was a simultaneous decapitation, striking multiple locations across 6 states at the exact same moment to prevent word from spreading or evidence from being destroyed. The night of retribution. As tactical units moved in, the sheer scale of the operation's success became clear through the volume of poison seized. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Agents breached the primary hub, recovering 396 kilograms of fentanyl pills and 11.5 kilograms of powder. They also seized $610,000 in cash and 49 firearms, many of which were equipped with illegal switches to create fully automatic machine guns. Salem, Oregon. Officers targeted the high-demand southern sector, seizing over $2.8 million in cash, the working capital of the empire, alongside high-value jewelry and armored Ford F-150 Shelbys. Layton, Utah. The strike here focused on another financial node, netting $780,000 in illicit funds, and a Dodge TRX Mammoth valued at $150,000. Phoenix, Arizona. A critical border transit point was severed, resulting in the seizure of 72 pounds of methamphetamine and another 13 kilograms of fentanyl pills. The raids were a devastating blow to the Sinaloa-linked cell, but the most chilling discoveries were found in the residential pockets of the network. In Santa Fe, agents hit a stash house run by Philip Lovato, seizing 110,000 pills. Perhaps most tragic was the raid on the apartment of Roberta Herrera. Inside, among 365,000 fentanyl pills and 24 firearms, officers found a minor child, a stark reminder of the human misery that fueled Amaya's profits. Forensic breakthroughs. While the physical seizures were historic, the legal noose was tightened by forensic science. Just as the Middleton gangs were undone by DNA on latex gloves, the Amaya network left behind genetic signatures on packaging materials and pressing equipment. The IRS documented financial spikes that coincided perfectly with drug shipments, creating an irrefutable link between the cash in Oregon and the pills in New Mexico. The operation was a tactical masterpiece, but it was also a message. By reclassifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, the government had shifted from policing to warfare. The 16 individuals arrested, including the mastermind Amaya, discovered that in the modern era of biometrics, and shared international databases, there is no such thing as a ghost. The architecture of poison had been leveled. Yet, as the suspects were led away in chains, the final chapter, the quest for ultimate justice, was only beginning in the federal courtrooms of the American West. The final chapter of the Heriberto Salazar Amaya empire did not play out in the dark alleys of Albuquerque or the high-speed corridors of the interstate, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of the United States federal court system. For a man who had treated his drug network like a corporate conglomerate, the reality of his business model was finally laid bare under the scrutiny of federal law. The price of an empire was no longer measured in the millions of dollars generated from poison, but in the decades of human life that would now be spent behind iron bars. The legal showdown was unprecedented, fueled by the government's strategic decision to categorize fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. As Attorney General Pam Bondi stood before the press, her message was a direct echo of the doctrine that had brought down the network. Those who flood American cities with this chemical plague are no longer mere drug dealers. They are threats to the very fabric of national security. The judicial reckoning. The indictment handed down in the District of New Mexico was an exhaustive catalog of criminality. Heriberto Salazar Amaya, the 6-year-old mastermind who had previously mocked the American border, faced a mountain of charges that left no room for escape. Conspiracy to distribute fentanyl, the core charge that tied the 6-state network together. Illegal re-entry after deportation, a charge that highlighted his persistent defiance of U.S. law. Conspiracy to harbor unauthorized aliens, linking his drug operations to his exploitation of other migrants. Hiring unauthorized aliens without work authorization, further exposing the exploitative nature of his family business. Amaya's inner circle faced a similar fate. His primary lieutenants, including Cesar Acuña Moreno and Bruce Cedillo, were charged not only with drug distribution, but with the possession of firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking, a charge that carried heavy mandatory minimums due to the ghost guns and automatic switches recovered during the raids. The sentencing reflected the gravity of the threat. While the exact years are being tallied as the trials conclude, the Operation Take Back America initiative has ensured that these individuals will not return to Mexico or the streets of the West to resume their trade. Amaya's cousin, brother, and trusted tenants were scattered across the federal prison system, mirroring the collapse of the Rothwell and Hunt networks in the UK. Yet, the victory remains bittersweet. The dismantling of the Amaya network created a temporary vacuum in the Western drug market, a disruption that police acknowledge is often fleeting. As long as the demand for synthetic opioids persists, new masterminds will attempt to fill the void, learning from Amaya's mistakes just as he learned from those before him. The scars on the American landscape remain. The families in New Mexico, Oregon, and Arizona who lost loved ones to the Amaya Cells product will never truly find closure. But the message from the Department of Justice is clear. The law is patient, and the classification of fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction has changed the rules of the hunt. Heriberto Salazar Amaya thought he was too smart for the system. He discovered that the system simply needed to decide he was a priority. The hunt for the next kingpin has already begun. The Tartan Pimpernels of the world may vanish for a time, but in the end, the law doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be inevitable.